Today at the National Press Club, founder of Climate 200, Simon Holmes, the energy analyst and clean tech investors group backed 11 successful candidates at the 2022 election. The group will support 35 campaigns in the upcoming election. Simon Holmes with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club and today's Westpac address. My name is Tom Connell. I'm the President of the club and Chief Election Analyst and Anchor at Sky News. Our guest today is Simon Holmes, founder of Climate 200. It, of course, backed candidates that swept all before them in the last election, most famously with the teal wave in Sydney, Melbourne and Perth, winning 6 new seats in Parliament. It's the last time I'll say teal in the intro. At least, Simon, I promise. It was a big part, of course, of the explosion of the crossbench to 16 members, and that's a big reason why minority government is now the firm favourite at the next election. Climate 200 cashed up, supporting 35 lower house candidates this time around, aiming to have more MPs elected. The question, though, lingers, was 2022 the beginning of a movement or more a one-off in the perfect political climate? In the last election, Scott Morrison was political poison, I think it's fair to say. He's now gone. Climate change was seen as a primary issue for many voters. That's now been trumped for many by the cost of living. Then there was the promise of the National Anti-Corruption Commission to sweep the halls of Parliament. It's been implemented. So far, it seems all elected MPs are squeaky clean. So there you go. This time around, perhaps the primary question might be, do Australians want independence? If that means a hung parliament. Someone may or may not answer that now, but you can follow today's conversation at Press Club Ost or hashtag NPC. Please welcome Simon Holmes.
Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you to everybody who has come along today. And thanks to the Press Club for hosting me here yet again today. It's a pleasure to be back here today with you all. And first, a belated congratulations to you, Tom, on being elected the new President of the Press Club. I look forward to your tough questions and others from the floor at the end. I'd like to make a special mention to Tony Windsor, the former independent member for New England. Tony has driven about 6 hours to be here today. On this beautiful Ngunnawal land, I pay my respects to elders past and present, and our thoughts are with those in Queensland and northern New South Wales who still face the devastating impact of Cyclone Alfred. Australia has always had big weather, drought, bushfires, floods and cyclones, but the increasing severity and frequency of some of these events remind us that the impact of climate change is already here and we must act now. Australia is home to the oldest living culture on Earth. Our time here is just a fleeting moment in the span of an ancient continent, and we must use it well. A little over 3 years ago, I had the privilege of addressing you here at the National Press Club for the first time. Some things are the same. We were weeks out from a federal election. We talked about how the problem with our politics is that parties are more interested in winning elections than advancing our nation. How they seek power without purpose. How the party machines have proven themselves incapable of addressing the big challenges that we face. And how they have tilted the electoral playing field in their favour, wielding their enormous power and the advantages of incumbency to box out small challenges. Some things are a little different. The concept of a community independent is now more widely understood, and 7 more were elected to this parliament. We've had big wins on climate, integrity and gender equity. Independents forced the Labor government to deliver on the National Anti-Corruption Commission. They've strengthened our emissions targets. They've improved the safeguard mechanism to regulate our largest polluters. They've led the way on HECS debt relief for students and graduates, and they've enhanced gender equality, women's economic opportunity and safety, delivering the most gender-balanced parliament in Australia's history. But more work is needed. The Coalition is still the greatest threat to climate action. Their nuclear policy is a Trojan horse for extending fossil fuels. And in the words of Matt Keane, it's a 2 billion tonne carbon bomb that would make net zero by 2050 an impossibility. And it would cost the public north of $500 billion. Now, Labor, while an improvement, continues to expand fossil fuel projects. Is there any real difference between Scott Morrison's gas-led recovery and Labor's future gas strategy? Both are at odds with the science. To improve integrity, we need public hearings for the NAC and genuine whistleblower protections. And violence against women in Australia continues to be our national shame. This election is truly a sliding doors moment for our country. Will Australia emerge improved or impaired? Will we import authoritarian populism from Trump's White House? Or will the best of the Australian character once again reveal itself? Around the world, citizens are voting for massive political disruption. Across France, the US, Germany and others, we've seen how the economic fallout from the largest inflation spike in a generation, combined with the ongoing impacts of conflict in Europe and the Middle East, have eroded living standards and seen voters punish the political establishment. In the US, this was reflected in the so-called double hater phenomenon. It's voters who could not bring themselves to vote for either major party. They either stayed at home or they put their hopes in Trump, a perceived outsider. Here in Australia, compulsory voting means staying at home is not an option. A more responsible and considered media, combined with preferential voting, protects us from the worst of the extreme polarisation we see in the US. We are not America. We are not destined to follow them, but we are grappling with the ramifications of massive geopolitical change, while facing a range of crises here at home: a cost of living crisis, a housing crisis, an integrity crisis, and yes, the climate crisis. The people of Australia are under pressure and they are angry. If you're angry with the political system, if you are perhaps a double hater, here in Australia we have a much better option. Despite this perfect storm of challenges, we are fortunate enough to have a much more productive outlet for this genuine anger. We have community independents. They are smart, passionate, engaged people chosen by their communities. They're often reluctant when first asked, but incredibly hard-working once on board. They're leaders with vision and courage who make decisions based on evidence in the best interests of their community and our country. And they have vastly improved the tone and quality of our political discourse. At a time when trust in the political class is at an all-time low, community independents are rebuilding faith in democracy through a very powerful idea: communities coming together, selecting local leaders and backing them all the way to Canberra. Before we dive any further into the coming election, first I want to take a step back and reflect how the community independence movement got here. For decades, independents in Australian politics have faced a very steep climb. It's rarely been easy for an independent to get to Canberra. Just ask the people of Indi and Warringah. It takes not only the right person, chosen by their peers, it takes persistence and an entire community to unseat a major party incumbent. Over the last 10 elections, fewer than 2% of independents on the ballot have been successful. That's how difficult it's been for independents to break through the political establishment. But there are signs this is changing, led by the model pioneered by the Voices of Indi group in 2012 that resulted in the election of Cathy McGowan. Zali Steggall's election in 2019 proved that the model could work in urban electorates. And then in 2022, we saw a breakthrough result for independents. 11 were elected to Parliament, 7 for the first time. 6 in the House and David Pocock in the Senate, out of a pool of just 23 contenders. That's a success rate of nearly 50%. This is a difference genuine community candidates, with the help to level the playing field, can make. The implications of this success are profound. We now have the largest crossbench in the history of the modern parliament, and we are better for it. But let me make something really clear. Climate 200 did not start this movement. We didn't create it, nor am I speaking for the independents or the movement. I'm simply someone who understands its power and its potential. I'm not running for office, and the truth is Parliament does not need more people like me. It needs more locals with real community standing, not warriors of the left or the right, but people who speak from and for the heart of their communities. Like the 1,000 everyday Australians from right around the country who attended the Community Independence Convention in June last year. This movement is not Climate 200's. It is the product of thousands and thousands of regular people's frustration with the status quo and of communities hoping to take back control of their future. Climate 200 simply recognised the profound shift in our democracy and sought to provide resources and support needed to help communities and their independent candidates succeed. Climate 200 does not start campaigns. Climate 200 does not run campaigns. Climate 200 does not target seats or select candidates. Those responsibilities lie squarely with the communities themselves. Climate 200 comes to these campaigns relatively late in the game, after countless kitchen table conversations, after town halls and after candidate selection. How communities choose their candidates could not be more different from the way the major parties go about it. The major party pre-selection pool is a tiny but ambitious group who hang around their Liberal or Labor branch, building networks of obligation, often parked in MPs' offices or think tanks while they wait for the local member to move on. 52% of current coalition MPs and 64% of Labor MPs are former staffers. They're careerists with next to zero real-world experience. The community independent selection process is very different. Communities conduct their own executive search, advertising far and wide, looking for the best possible representative their community has to offer. The preferred candidate is already successful, both personally and professionally. I've heard many stories from community groups where the candidate has said, "No thanks, I've never wanted to be a politician." And the response from the community is, "Great, you've passed the first test." What makes community independence different is these people often don't want to be politicians, but they are called to serve by their communities. In Parliament today, we have independents who have come from careers in business, medicine and journalism. This is how Parliament used to look when politics was a civil duty, not a career pathway. The list of community candidates contesting this election is equally impressive. There's a psychologist in Moore, a surgeon in Forest, a nurse in Cowper. They've quit their jobs and they've put their reputations on the line. And if elected, they'll have the honour of voting in Parliament on behalf of their communities. The talent pool available to community independents is vast. It is literally everybody in the whole electorate. This is why community independents attract such high calibre candidates. Today, Climate 200 has over 44,000 supporters around the country. Across the independence movement, there are tens of thousands more, and every day, more are joining us. The community independents are not a singular force, but a decentralised movement, shifting the direction of Australian politics in real time. Until recently, democracy was something done by others, in places we could not access, operating by rules we did not know. But now people are realising that we are democracy. It is of us, by us and for us. It's a wonder to witness the audacity and the success of this movement. Communities taking back democracy, with each door knocked, with every town hall rally held and each vote cast. This is exactly what democracy should look like and will depend on if it is to survive and thrive in an increasingly distrustful and volatile society. We do not know where this movement will land. We only know that something extraordinary is happening around the country. This year, there are more community independents running for office than at any other time in Australian history. Community independents are the fastest growing political movement in the country. We haven't seen vitality like this in Australian democracy for decades. Some might argue that we've never seen anything like this. At this election, 1 in 4 Australians will have a chance to vote for a community-supported independent, providing a viable alternative for millions of Australians dissatisfied with the major parties. Uninspired by Labor's timidity, and turned off by the coalition's relentless negativity. Most of the independent candidates are running in previously safe seats, seats that have long been taken for granted by the major parties. This is a big upgrade to our democracy. When communities choose to run a competitive independent, they win no matter what the outcome. Marginal seats get attention and they get support. Safe seats are ignored. The political system has been dominated by the major parties who treat electorates as if they are personal property. A safe seat means there's a politician sitting in Parliament with no realistic possibility the voting public will remove them. There are 150 seats in the House of Representatives now. 109 are considered safe on a margin of over 6 points. For voters in these seats, if they can feel with justification that there's no real choice. The independence movement takes safe seats and turns them into contests of ideas and grassroots democracy. Just ask Tony Abbott, who lost his seat of Warringah to Jali Segel, which he previously held by over 20%. No seat is ever owned by a political party or is theirs by right. This election, Climate 200 is supporting 35 community independent campaigns across the country. Warringah to Wannon, Curtin to Cowper, Flinders to Fairfax. And while some see the movement as an inner city phenomenon, it is far from it. This movement began in regional Australia, in Indi. So it's fitting that this election, of the community campaigns Climate 200 is supporting, over half are in rural and regional areas. In this vacuum of political leadership, the community independence movement has become a unifying power in Australia's politics at a time of increasing division. You can see this in the composition of every community independent group. There are supporters from across the political spectrum. Like Stuart in Dixon, once a Liberal supporter, is now committed to Ellie Smith's campaign to unseat Peter Dutton. Or Josh, a former ALP member in Flinders, is now volunteering on Ben Smith's campaign. Volunteers like Stuart and Josh give their time for free, but campaigns cost money. There's just no getting around that. In the last election cycle, the major parties spent almost $500 million, not including third-party campaigns such as the Minerals Council. This massive investment isn't spread across all seats. Major parties often spend next to nothing in safe or unattainable seats, so they can funnel millions into marginal races, many of which will be against community independents at this election. By contrast, all up, independent candidates spent $25 million, with Climate 200 contributing just 13 of that. I'm proud to have personally contributed about 2% of Climate 200's total. The funds we raised from more than 11,000 donors is a lot of money, but it's a small fraction of what the major parties spend. We focus on grassroots fundraising, mobilising everyday Australians to contribute what they can. We need all the support we can get this election, and it's coming in many forms. Like 17-year-old Evie Goffman, she's too young to vote, but last month she raised $500 for community independence at a swimming carnival bake sale. Or Yarraville mums, Mia and Jess, who founded 200 Mums for Climate 200. They've raised over $10,000 in the last 3 weeks from their mums network. They were inspired by a similar effort led by school teachers in Canberra who have crowdfunded over $100,000 so far. Or David Donaldson, who for his 94th birthday matched $94,000 worth of small dollar donations, being $1,000 for every year of his life. I mention them not simply to recognise their contribution, but to contrast Climate 200 with Clive Palmer's series of political ventures. Palmer's already started an advertising blitz to support candidates running in every seat in vague support of Trump-like policies. He has a lot of cash. What he doesn't have is Evie, Mia, Jess and David. Money can't buy passion or grassroots support or the feeling of your community coming together to achieve something wonderful. That's why in the last election, Clive Palmer spent over $120 million and ended up with just 1/3 of a quota and 1 senator. Clive gave the lesson to us all that community is far more powerful than money alone. I understand how lucky I am to be able to support the movement as I do, but it's people like Frosty from regional South Australia who's making ends meet on the aged pension, and he still donates $10 a fortnight. These are the sacrifices that are truly remarkable. Given some of the numbers you've heard today, it may not seem like much, but $10 pays for a corflute or 100 flyers, or a T-shirt for a volunteer, and that adds up quick. Which is why we saw the other week when more than 4,500 donors came together and raised over $1 million after Andrew Constance confirmed that the coalition would abandon our Paris targets. People contribute what they can, and every contribution, no matter how small, makes a difference. We've already distributed almost every dollar. We have a mantra in Climate 200's team that drives our accountant mad: go broke every week. It can be quite stressful. Yesterday, after making donations, I saw Climate 200's election account go down to just $76.87. But it means we get every cent donated to grassroots campaigns every week. With the election extended by at least another 3 weeks, donations now are crucial. The 35 campaigns we have supported are up against the big money of the major parties, Clive Palmer, and the massive influence of Gina Rinehart and the fossil fuels lobby. Our hope is that those who come close in this election will be set up for victory in 2028. We are playing the long game here because we know that this movement is bigger than any election. The election in 2028 could be a very different one due to the major parties' recent electoral law changes. When last I spoke here, I said I wish it were possible for great candidates to get elected with evidence-based policies and community support alone. But if an ordinary citizen is brave enough to take on the major parties, even if they can raise $1 million, they're still likely to be outspent 2 to 1, as Zali Steggall was in 2019. The playing field is tilted in favour of the major parties. In Wannon, if today you donate $1,500 to Liberal MP Dan Tehan, your donation is tax deductible. If today you would donate the same to independent opponent Alex Dyson, it's not. Dan Tehan has a copy of the electoral roll. Alex Dyson has to pay tens of thousands for the same information. Dan Tehan has a small army of taxpayer-funded workers working on his campaign. Alex Dyson has none. The public purse has funded more than $750,000 worth of Dan Tehan's communication to Wannon residents over the last 3 years, but not 1 cent of Dyson's. I've said previously that the success of the community independents would elicit an immune system response from the major parties. And in one of the final acts of Parliament, we saw what this response looks like. The major parties conspired and they tilted the playing field even further in their favour, more than doubling the amount of public funding they received to run their campaigns to over $130 million per electoral cycle. This is an increase of around $80 million since 2022, in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Just as the Australian public are walking away from the major parties, they're being forced to fund them more. The major parties have instituted an expenditure cap, but allowed themselves to massively outspend independents. The package is a financial gerrymander. While we welcome the improvements to transparency, the net effect of the package is to degrade our democracy, tightening the major parties' grip on power, just as voters seek to loosen it. At the last election, more than 1 in 3 Australians did not vote for either major party. Their primary votes have been in systemic decline for decades. In 1975, 96% of Australians voted for the 2 major parties. By 2022, it had fallen to just 68%. Rather than changing their votes to broaden their appeal to the electorate, they chose instead to rig the rules. They rarely agree on anything, but when self-interest is at stake, they can't wait to get in bed with each other. All at the cost to the public who are abandoning the major parties at the ballot box. Today, I began by saying the upcoming election presents a sliding doors moment for Australia. Right now, a Peter Dutton majority government is a very real possibility. This is the man who lauded Donald Trump as shrewd and a big thinker. 2 weeks ago, an AFR freshwater poll showed a 4.1% swing to the Liberal National Party. If that swing is uniform across the country, it would put Anthony Albanese in minority, and it could even deliver Peter Dutton the seats he needs to form a majority government. And the swing could be bigger on election day. The better alternative is minority government with either major party. There's a lot of hand-wringing in some sections of the media about stability where minority government is discussed. Yet in the last 20 years, across federal, states and territories, there have been 15 minority governments, including Julia Gillard's of 2010 to 13 and Scott Morrison's of 2018 to 19. While these were febrile times, none of that instability came from the crossbench. And when you think about it, almost every time the coalition is in power, there is minority government. Since World War II, the Liberals have only governed in majority 3 times over 51 years of power. And even then, it governed in coalition with the Nationals, bound by a secret agreement that none of us have ever seen. An agreement that has pulled the Liberals further and further to the right and away from the Liberal principles upon which Menzies' party was founded. Government-owned power stations, divestiture powers to break up businesses. Does this sound like the policy of small government and free market advocates? Theirs is a marriage not only of convenience, but of chaos, more chaotic than any hung parliament. Minority government is entirely in the hands of the voters, and rightly so. But with minority government, the expected outcome of this election, whichever side forms government, they will likely have to be more consultative, more transparent, and deliver more evidence-based policy rather than just raw politics. This can only be a good thing, because like it or not, everything is politics. Politics is the air that we all breathe. But for too long, we've subcontracted out to a political class who have said, "Don't worry, never you mind." Now, this movement is taking back our democracy. What we are witnessing right now is a democratic revival, a renewal of the spirit of service and civic responsibility. And the numbers don't lie. 1 in 3 voters in this country now rejects the major parties. Our polling shows that even the concept of the major political parties is more despised by voters than either the Prime Minister or the opposition leader. How can you blame them when the major parties are more focused on fighting each other than fighting for Australia? And with these shifts come the potential for something transformative. The independents running this year are not just offering an alternative to the two-party system, they're offering a new way forward, one that is more accountable, more transparent, and more in tune with the needs of the people. Last time I was up here, I said politics is too important to be left to politicians. This is truer today than it was 3 years ago. It's also why the community independence movement is the fastest growing force in this country. We are supporting 35 community campaigns at this election. And this is why, for the first time in history, 1 in 4 Australians will have the opportunity to vote for a community independent. This is a huge step forward for our democracy, and it's one that we should all be excited about. So as we approach this election, let's remember this is our moment, a sliding doors moment for Australia. The decision that we make in the coming weeks will shape the future of our country. Let us choose the path that leads to a stronger, fairer, better represented country, with a political system that works collaboratively to solve the challenges before us, making key policy decisions based on evidence, where integrity in our politics is not only demanded, but delivered, and it places people, not parties, at its centre. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Simon. Beginning with my question before going to my colleagues. So I know you stressed today you don't have a role until later on in the piece in terms of backing candidates financially. And you've said that before, obviously. Just looking at the numbers, though, so there are 26 candidates you're backing for new seats, if you like. 4 of them are Labor seats, and that's despite the fact that Labor has 20 more seats in the coalition. You yourself said you believe they're got a similar policy with the coalition on gas. Did you turn down any independent groups running or offering to run or putting someone up in a Labor seat?
No, we haven't. We didn't turn anyone. We didn't turn any genuine community groups. I get people all the time approaching Climate 200 saying, it's quite quaint. They say, I've never thought of running for politics before, but I'm really frustrated with the system and I'd like to run as an independent. And they are absolutely not the kind of candidates we're looking for, a self-nominated individual. What we do is we've hung out our shingles saying that we are prepared to support genuine community groups that are aligned with our values, the three pillars: climate, integrity and women. So of genuine groups that approached us, that have been through a community listening process, that have gone and selected a candidate, I believe we've supported them all. Okay. I think what's interesting is where these groups start up. At the last election, I don't think there were any in Labor-held seats. I think it's really interesting.
So it's starting. Does the number still feel low to you, do you think?
I think it's a response to frustration. And there's a campaign down in Franklin in a seat held by a Labor Minister of Cabinet. Very frustrated. I mean, one of the biggest issues down there is the salmon farming issue. There's another very vibrant campaign up in Solomon, up in the Northern Territory, where one of the biggest issues there is the middle arm fossil fuel expansion, and that's got people in the Northern Territory riled up. Whether that translates to electoral success comes down to the voters.
Ben Westcott from Bloomberg.
Thanks very much for your speech. Ben Westcott from Bloomberg. It's very fitting we have Mr. Tony Windsor here today, because obviously he's an example of what MPs can do in a minority government. He's also a fitting example of what happens sometimes to MPs who support minority governments. If as the polls are sort of showing, we expect a minority government after the election, are you confident that TL MPs can survive a backlash if they are seen to support the government on either side of the political spectrum at the next election?
Yeah, well, thankfully, I'll be nowhere near that room. That'll be entirely a member for those that'll be entirely an issue for those elected members to work out. And remember, the contract is between the elected MP and the community that has brought them there. The next Parliament is going to be very interesting, whatever comes out of it. But I'm confident it's going to be a better Parliament than ones we've experienced in recent years.
Sure. Nothing about, though, who they'll support. It's a question of, whoever they support in 2028, as you were talking, will they face a backlash for being part of a minority government?
I think that's entirely be a product of how well the next government operates. And I'd say it's whoever is in the lodge, it'll be in their interests that it is a highly functional government. Otherwise, they will be punished for it too.
Next question, Sarah Ison from The Australian.
Hi, Sarah Ison from The Australian. Thank you for your address, Mr. Holmes Court. I just want to ask about your investments in renewable energy. What are they, and do any of the projects that you do invest in currently receive government subsidies?
Hi, Sarah. Good to meet you in person. We've had many conversations over text over the years. It's funny how it's actually your newspaper has painted me as some renewable energy mogul, right? I hate to disappoint you, but less than 2% of my investments are in renewables, which is about the same as most Australians through their superannuation. So I'm not a big renewables investor. Those projects receive renewable energy certificates, but I'm not an active investor in the space.
Thank you.
Tom McElroy from the Australian Financial Review.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Mr. Holmes Court, for taking our questions. Tom McElroy from the Financial Review. Further to Ben Westcott's question, wouldn't a Climate 200-backed independent face a backlash for supporting a Peter Dutton-led minority government? Would that be a breach of faith with the movement? And would you be disappointed if that occurred?
It's an interesting question. I think remember this is 35 individual campaigns. Every one of those campaigns has grown up from within the community, and that candidate and hopefully future MP is supported by a large group. I mean, in Kooyong last time, where I live, there were 2,000 volunteers out on election day. The candidate knows exactly what the people in their electorate wants, and if they don't deliver it, they can't expect to be returned. So it's really on an electorate by electorate basis, and what I think doesn't really matter. But what I do know is the difference between a Dutton majority and a Dutton minority is a world apart, and the independents stand between those two.
Thank you.
The clue being in the name, though, Climate 200, you believe the coalition's path lets off I think you called it a carbon bomb. So if a Climate 200-backed candidate does a deal that effectively increases emissions, isn't that a pretty clear confirmation of what the change you want to effect?
Well, it's so hypothetical. None of us know what the split is, what the final count's going to be. Are the two major parties going to be level pegging, or is one going to be well ahead of the other? And what are the conversations that are going to happen to secure that? I'm not a part of those conversations. I don't know what's going to be discussed. I think we'll all be in a much different position to evaluate that question.
Is that an indication, so if the coalition's way ahead on seats, there's a realpolitik to about it around trading with them? Or?
Yeah, look, I'm not an expert in the constitutional issues. Clearly there's also public expectation and conjecture around it, but really it's a matter for those who are elected on the day.
Next question, Ruben Spargo from Sky News.
Thanks, Tom. Ruben Spargo, Sky News. You've spoken today about being hands-off in regards to MPs that are elected with the help of Climate 200. So I just wanted to clarify the AFR power list. Did you ask Zoe Daniel, Allegra Spender, or anyone in their office to try to get you off that list?
Yeah. Oh, I'm actually happy. I'm glad that you raised that question. And I can say categorically, I have never asked any MP to ask a question of anything from anyone. Okay, that story. Look, it was a cute hook for Phil Corey to write a piece in the Fin Review. It was a cute hook, but the story is false. The journalist who was approached, and a journalist was approached by a few individuals, has confirmed to me that they know that the story is wrong. The journalist who wrote the article has been told that the story is wrong. The editor has been advised that the story is wrong. I think what's pathetic about this whole episode is that Jason Falinsky, who now represents the shady group, the coal-funded group Australians for Prosperity, filed a NAC complaint. And if you read between the lines on the response from the NAC, a very strong rebuke that we should not politicise the National Integrity Organisation. So thank you for letting me have the opportunity of confirming to you that that story is wrong.
Obviously a fairly emphatic response. Did you seek a retraction? Because usually in the media, say if we get things totally wrong,
look,
you do see corrections out.
An incredible amount of rubbish is written about me on a daily basis, and I reckon I seek retractions about a third of the time. I have sought a retraction from the AFR on that. It is yet to be forthcoming.
Okay. Jason Koutsoukis from the Saturday Paper.
Simon Holmes, thank you for your speech. Alex Dyson, the candidate that you're backing in Wannon, last week distanced himself from the Southern Ocean wind zone. How do you explain that? And does it undermine your argument that this act of political expediency, does that undermine your argument that community independence are about vision and courage?
Yeah, interesting. I had a fair bit to do with the renewable energy industry. Where this whole renewable thing comes from is I was involved in a small community-owned wind farm in Daylesford in central Victoria. My entire investment in the wind industry is a share of a cooperative that owns 2 wind turbines that were built 15 years ago, right? That's it. We built that project at a very politically charged time for the wind industry, and I see that political charging again, the politicisation of wind, where one party chooses to make a particular issue controversial, and certainly the Liberal Party is doing that right now with offshore wind. It's funny, the party that introduced the offshore wind legislation, the enabling legislation, is the same party that has said it will rescind all of the zones, the offshore wind zones. It's bizarre. Not long ago, Angus Taylor and Tim Wilson were boasting that they introduced offshore wind to this country as if they built it with their bare hands. And now they are both advocating that the industry should be banished from Australia, just as Donald Trump has done. One thing, when I was involved in the industry in this community project is I noticed something where a lot of wind developers marched into a community with sort of the attitude of, we're here to save the world, move aside, and it often didn't work out well. I know of a particular wind farm where construction trucks chewed up the roads and chose to move big goods during the school bus drop-off time so that kids were missing classes, right? But the industry had been quite arrogant and just assumed that everyone would move aside because they were saving the world. I think what Alex Dyson is tapping into is very real concerns in his community that consultation needs to be improved. And communities, I think, are rightfully asking, as they are of many industries, if you're going to come here, it needs to be with significant community benefits. So those conversations are really live. One thing I can say is that I know that Alex Dyson is absolutely passionate about climate action, which is more than can be said for Dan T and his opponent.
Paul Zakal, Sydney Morning Herald and The Age.
Thanks, Tom, and Mr Holmes Court, thanks for your speech. The electoral laws that you reference, due to the differential in caps, incentivise the creation of federated party structures. Is Climate 200 in prospect to become a federated party? And what's your take on Climate 200 backing through advertising a group called Independent News, which presents itself as a news outlet, and Climate 200 donors backing a different news outlet without disclosing their funding of it?
Just so I get you right, let's firstly talk Independent News. We meet the public. We need to meet the public where they are, and that's largely on social media these days. I know you would prefer that it's on the pages of your newspaper, but to meet people where they are, we meet them very much on social media. Now, if you go to that page on Facebook, Independent News, very prominently, the first thing on that page is authorisation by Climate 200. We're not trying to hide it. What we're doing on that page is boosting articles, probably some articles from you, certainly your newspaper, that help make sure that good news, news that we think is important that electors see, is put in front of Australians. What was the first part of your question, sorry?
The electoral laws incentivise the creation of party structures.
Yeah,
Would Climate 200 become are you considering becoming a party?
I have zero interest in being involved in any party structure. I can't see how it would actually benefit Climate 200, and certainly I'm not sure that any of the independents would want anything to do with it. I don't think any of them would join a party. Anyway, if such a thing ever happened, it would be long after I've left. I want nothing to do with it.
I don't mean the independents joining a party. I mean Climate 200, technically, in a legal sense, becoming a party so that you can spend under the higher caps.
Look, one of the major advantages the parties have, in Victoria, there's this entity called the Cormac Foundation. It's a $125 million trust fund that supports the Liberal Party. They've got another one in Victoria, Vapold, which came from, I think it was a $40 million sale of a building to Rolex. Just in Victoria alone, there's about $200 million of endowment funding the party. And the new electoral laws largely exempt those organisations from any of the caps. Right? That's the kind of entrenched advantage that the parties have, that infrastructure. Plus, huge advantage when parties run candidates everywhere and receive large amount of public funding from seats they don't even try in. Some seats they might invest as little as $10,000, and under the new rules will receive $250,000 in funding that they get to harvest from the 4 out of 5 seats and direct to the 1 out of 5 that's actually a target seat. Our movement doesn't lend itself to either of those hacks, I guess, around the system. I don't see how establishing a party would help this movement.
The direct spend, at least the last time I looked on Facebook, had Climate 200 and several of the back candidates way ahead of party spending. Mm-hmm. Are you trumping them right now, and that's going to be in danger in the future?
That's the. We know this because Facebook or Meta and Google have transparency, right? No other part of our political campaigning has any transparency. We'll never know what Labor Party is spending, saying what Andrew Hurst or Paul Erickson are spending in Gilmore or Werriwa. We'll never have any transparency on that other than what they're doing on Facebook and Google. We'll never have any transparency. Right now, there's more than 1,000 publicly funded employees working on the re-election of major party MPs around the country. We'll never have any transparency on that. So it's quite amusing to me that people... I'll read...
But it's the only one I can see.
It is because our transparency is rubbish.
Isn't it?
Yep.
So
you'll see our spending from this community movement. You'll see it in detail, seat by seat, before October of this year. You won't see any disclosure from the major parties until February of next year, and it won't be broken down in any detail. So it's a fun news headline, and I'm going to read in several of your newspapers today that Climate 200 is cashed up. I mean, seriously, this movement, the entire independence movement, was 25 million at last election, and the major parties had 500 million between them, and we get called cashed up.
Tina Curtis from the West Australian.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Simon. Tom's actually just asked half my question for me. I was interested to hear you say in your speech that Climate 200 doesn't run campaigns. I mean, the ads in my Instagram feed over the past week would beg to differ, and those numbers do show that you've outspent the entire Australian government in the last month. So how can you say that you don't campaign?
Sure.
And also, what is your vetting process, if any, for, I guess, particularly the big money donors that are coming to you? Not the small donors that you spoke about in your speech, the people who are giving $1 million every year.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for your question, Katina. So the first thing is by campaigns. When I said we don't run campaigns, I mean we don't run electoral campaigns for candidates. So the candidates, every one of the 35 candidates, it's incredible. When I look at that map of 35 people around the country, every one of them started, it always just starts with 2 or 3 people in a coffee shop with the most audacious plan that we're going to flip this seat. And they get together, and soon it's 20 people, and then it's 200 people, and they go out and try to find a candidate, and they advertise, and just look at that plan, that map of 35 candidates, and that amazing amount of human capital around the country is working on this movement. It blows me away. We don't get in to the weeds and run any of those campaigns. They run themselves. Yes, we do. We run advertising campaigns to lift the salience of issues or to make people aware of independence. We did a lot of work at the last election to explain preferential voting, and also that voting for an independent was a viable and responsible thing to do with your vote. So yes, we will do that. Second part of your single question was about vetting. The AEC is rightfully very concerned to make sure there's no foreign interference with Australian elections. So we make sure that everyone fulfils those requirements, and it is absolutely known to every one of our donors. It's very different from the major parties. You don't get to sit down with an MP after donating to Climate 200. We don't have $15,000 a head functions where you get to sit next to a minister. There's this model of cash for access or pay to play. It just doesn't exist in this movement, and it's incredibly refreshing that I'm speaking with donors who, like me, have a radical trust in this new form of democracy.
Doing my job for me on the questions, but I'll sneak one in anyway. I guess on the money, it's this. So from what we can see in big areas of advertising, Facebook and so on, you're well ahead of the other parties. Is it still possible to say you're David, given that, or have you sneaked into Goliath territory?
25 million, 500 million, right? If you're David... If you're David, $25 million tall, and you're up against $500 million tall Goliath, with we help people to build an amazing slingshot. We help people climb the wall of incumbency that they recently just put a moat around and pulled up the drawbridge. It's still, put it in perspective. Put it in perspective of the entire electoral spend, and we are small fry. But I know half the people in this room will write something tomorrow, cashed up Climate 200. Remember, 25, 500.
I'll keep going before you sort of put your back out with that stretch. Lachlan Leeming from the Daily Telegraph.
Lachlan Leeming, Daily Telegraph. Thanks for your address, Mr Holmes of Court. Polling released earlier this week showed that a drop in support for the Greens and Labor could eat away at preference flows, which were key to Climate 200 backed candidates winning in 2022. Do you think cost of living pressures over the last term of government have eaten away at those pillars on which the Teals were elected in 22?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We still see strong support for climate, and I think the greatest indication of that was just the other week when Andrew Constance said that the coalition under the coalition the Paris targets would be off the table, right? Very categorically, and the response from the community, from our donors, was immense. But I'd say it's not the biggest election. It's not the biggest issue at this election. But one thing I would like to share with you, something from our polling. It was our theory, backed by data and proven out at the last election, that when an incumbent's primary vote drops below 43, they enter what we call the danger zone, right? When it's below 43% primary, then an independent is in a position to come from second, roll up on preferences and win. And in 19 challenger seats, we're supporting 9 incumbents and 26 challengers. We've polled 19 of those seats in the last few weeks, and in 14 of those 19, the opponent is in that danger zone. In all of the incumbent seats, where the independents that were elected in 2022 and before, in all of those, the opponent is also in the danger zone. It doesn't mean that the campaign's a win, but it means that if they run a really good campaign, if nobody stuffs up and they get that strong community support so that there's hundreds or even 2,000, as I saw in Kooyong, if they come out, then there's a very good chance those campaigns can win.
If I could ask just a follow-up, you said your research indicates climate change isn't the top issue this election. What are you finding is the top issue, and how is your movement pivoting to address that?
I've been told recently that the 3 biggest issues in Australia, just by our polling team, the 3 biggest issues are cost of living, and cost of living, right? And what I've seen a lot of campaigns with very, I think, very effective delivery explain to people the connection between strong climate action and cost of living. This year we celebrated the 4 millionth Australian household put solar on its roof. Every one of those homes is experiencing a lower cost of living than people who didn't do so. In time, the electrification of our homes and transport will reduce energy costs for households dramatically. And I think we're all aware that the increased severity and frequency of natural disasters is driving up insurance costs. There's a direct connection between climate and cost of living. And the good campaigns, the good communicators are getting this message across.
Thank you.
Next question from Simon Gross.
Simon Gross, Canberra IQ. You shared the general view that hung parliaments don't do big reform, but I wonder if there's a chance that might change. The last time I saw you in this room was February last year. You were here to hear the eminences grise of the policy set, Ross Garnaut and Rod Sims, propose a carbon levy on the extraction and sale and import of fossil fuels. They said it would raise $100 billion a year. Major reform, ambitious, bold.
Yep.
It died, went nowhere. You were here because they were here as the front people for the Superpower Institute.
Yeah.
You're on the board.
I am.
You're assumed to be the funder, but no one knows who funds the Superpower Institute. You also fund the teals. So if you get a bunch of teals up this year, and they have a leverage with a minority government, would it be likely that they would pull out the Superpower Institute's carbon levy proposal and put that as a bargaining chip?
I haven't discussed the Superpower Institute's work with any of the candidates or any of the MPs in Parliament, so I honestly don't know where they stand on it. But I remember sitting in this room in February last year where Ross Garnaut and Rod Sims spoke about it and prefixed it saying this idea will probably die today, right? But they wanted to get it on...
Very strange.
They wanted to get it on the agenda that, and we should all be talking about this, that polluters should pay. And we have a massive transition ahead of us in this country. And the proposal is that polluters pay to help ease this transition. Sounds pretty compelling to me, but what independent candidates do and say is totally up to them. And I should just say, just as I'm about 2% of the funding of Climate 200, I can say that I'm a very similar level for the Superpower Institute.
Thank you.
Dana Daniel from the Canberra Times.
Dana Daniel from the Canberra Times. Thank you for your speech, Mr Holmes Court. My question's along similar lines to Tom and Katina. You've argued that the Climate 200 movement has been misunderstood by the media, and you say that every candidate is backed by a grassroots local effort, that Climate 200 does not run or start campaigns. Here in the ACT, Climate 200 is backing an independent in the seat of Bean, Jessie Price, who's with us today. Jessie Price was selected through a process that has been criticised by some as opaque and secretive. The Voices of Being group was established by Jessie and someone else who doesn't live in the electorate of Bean, who is now running her campaign. As of this morning, I understand the group is still in the process of getting together 100 signatures from supporters who live in the electorate of Bean to register their candidate with the AEC. How does this square with your claim that Climate 200 backed candidates have grassroots local credentials? And doesn't your political funding model incentivise voices groups to spring up around a pre-chosen candidate who appears to tick Climate 200's boxes rather than emerging organically from a local movement?
Thanks, Dana, and great to meet you in person. It's weird when you've known someone by text and you've never actually seen them, so hello, welcome. It's odd, there's some, I don't know who fed that to you, the idea that they're running around Canberra looking for signatures on the nomination form. The AEC haven't issued nomination forms for this election, so your source, whoever that is wrong. As for the process in any individual seat, we stand back from that. We're not a part of that. As I mentioned, we come late to the game. We do look when campaigns first approach us. We have eligibility requirements, a whole lot of metrics. I don't have the metrics that been presented on me today, but we look at the number of people they have on their mailing list, the number of events they've run, the number of people who turn up, and the number of people who have donated. I'm taken back to a conversation I had with Tony Windsor maybe 4 years ago, where he said people call him all the time asking if they could be independents, as if somehow Tony gets to decide. And Tony explained to me, he said one of the things he said, I hope I'm not misquoting you, is that when you can stand in front of a town hall and convince 100 people to give you $1,000, then you're a viable candidate. That if you can't do fundraising in your own seat, how are you going to get any votes? So we look at that as a metric of success as well. And through...
Did that happen in Bean, for example? What do you know?
So we had criteria, I would have seen the criteria at the time. We're going back months now for Bean. Bean would not have progressed. We had some people who made early knocks on Climate 200's door where we said, it doesn't look like you guys have got momentum in your community, you haven't got metrics. Some of those, there's a campaign I know of down in the seat of Menzies in Jagga, where those groups came way too late to us and they didn't have, it didn't appear to be momentum and they really weren't quite sure what they were asking or what their plan was. We said to them, have a real crack at this election, and if you guys do reasonably well and you can show that you've got this community momentum, then let's have a chat about 2028.
And what do you think of Jessie's chances? It could potentially be one of the first Labor seats to fall. Are you optimistic? Some very strong polling in that seat, and obviously independents are not are not an unusual thing in the Territory, and there's a massive halo effect around David Pocock. Independents were very much on the agenda at the Territory election last year. That's definitely be an interesting seat to watch. And those who were watching the West Australian election last weekend saw a very interesting case, a very interesting community independent campaign in the seat of Fremantle. It's neck and neck. The counting is still going on, and I'm sure will be going on, and there's probably even going to be discussions with the Court of Disputed Returns. But that's a very interesting seat to watch, which shows that this movement is growing in comfort across the political spectrum.
All right. Keeping it as brief as we can, just to be a hypocrite about things, Dom Giannini from AFP is next.
Hey mate, thanks for taking the questions. I'll be relatively brief. With the electoral reform laws that you've been critical of, how much do you think major parties should be capped at? What should third parties like Climate 200 be capped at? And do you think elections should be completely publicly funded in the future?
It's a good question. I want to answer each part of it. Firstly, public funding. There's a huge problem with public funding that we've got. The public funding goes to incumbents, right? We give very soon under the new rules. It'll be was it $140 million to the major parties because they are in power. I think all up it's about 170 million will be given to incumbents. Do you know how much you get if you are a challenger? Zero, until after the election when the money's no good for you. We've learnt recently that the banks won't lend to up-and-coming campaigns. So what public funding does is the rich get richer and the poor stay poor. So there are real problems, but I get it. There's reasons why it sounds like a good idea, and we should work to try to make it fairer. The new rules have made it less fair. I mean, they give administrative funding to incumbents in order to comply with the new rules, but nothing to those who are outside the system. Should people be... What was your second part of that?
What do you think the caps should third parties for Climate 200
yeah.
be and major...
Well, expenditure caps are really interesting. As I said, as I touched on before, I mean, right now, we saw the media in the last week, Ron Meisen from AFR wrote a story about this, that there's been a massive mobilisation of staff to the Sydney campaign offices of Labor and the Liberal Party, right? And in every office around the country, there are 5 to 6 people, and there's about, I don't know, 700-800 private staffers for government, opposition and parties. All of those individuals are permitted to work on the re-election of their member, right? That's millions and millions of dollars is being spent by all of us to ensure that those folks get re-elected. Under the new rules, that is allowed to continue. It was clarified in the discussions in the Senate, but the independent challengers, their expenditure will be capped. So any dollar they spend on staff is a dollar less that they can spend on advertising. And in addition, although there's a cap on what can be spent on the per electorate level, the parties are allowed to come in over the top with massive party funding. So we've moved very quickly without any review, parliamentary review, without most of the MPs who vote on this having even seen the 400 pages of documentation before their vote was counted. We've moved to a system that has dramatically increased the public funding and for incumbents, but put a lid on what can go. You can also, you could give, under the new rules, you can give $50,000 not only to the Labor Party, but to its federal branch, but to branch in every state and territory, plus the nearly 100 associated entities it comes from. You could give to a large number of those and still comply with the rules. So the system dramatically changes that. Look, I'm totally, I've had these discussions with Don Farrell. We don't oppose caps on both expenditure and donations, but they need to be fair. We need to have a level playing field. We need to recognise there's a massive incumbency advantage, and so the caps should be differentiated or allowances made for those that don't have the massive public funding or allowances that aren't counted into their expenditure caps.
Okay, next question, Sarah Tomescu from SBS.
Thank you very much. Very briefly on your renewable investments, have you or would you consider using your considerable wealth to invest in green hydrogen?
Look, it's funny. People ask me a lot: is green hydrogen overhyped or really important? And the answer to that is yes.
To
both. Both. I think so much of the public was misled by really effusive, we'll be using hydrogen for everything. We'll have hydrogen cars, we'll have hydrogen running our cooktops at home. None of that will ever happen. It's looking unlikely that we will ship large amounts of hydrogen in gaseous or liquid form. But hydrogen will play a significant role in the decarbonisation of the global economy this century. Hydrogen is the way that we decarbonise steel. And Australia has the opportunity of generating green hydrogen at a lower cost than, at scale, than pretty much any country, and certainly any country with an advanced economy. So if we want to play a significant role in the steel or iron industry, we already play a massive role at the very bottom, but we just dig it up and ship it. At the moment, we ship it, and we ship the metallurgical coal to turn it into steel or iron overseas. In a decarbonised world, it makes sense for us to use green hydrogen to decarbonise steel, and Australia will be a winner from that. I was really excited to see that there has been policy announced recently to help Whyalla on that journey, and I look forward to seeing opportunities that come out of it. But you won't be driving a hydrogen car, and you won't have hydrogen in your home.
Thanks. Final question, Krishani Danji from The Guardian.
Thank you for your address. You've spoken a lot today about the importance of transparency. I just want to draw you to Gazette News. There's been a coalition complaint against it that it's been backed by some of Climate 200's major donors, and that's not exactly transparent. There's 5 outlets. They're in areas where there are teal or Climate 200 backed independents running. Does there need to be more transparency in what they're doing and who's backing them?
So I don't know a lot about Gazette. There's no connection between Climate 200 and Gazette. I have met the founder of it before. I knew she was starting a business. Sounds like a really interesting development in media. Media is an extremely tough environment in Australia, as you'd know, to make a business out of it. And I really wish her well. But I think there should be transparency across all media. what their motives are, and sadly I think it's been lacking from a lot of the media over many decades.
All right. Keep the applause going. That's a completing speech. Thank you, Simon. Thank you for your time today, and please accept our gift of membership to the club. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, guys.